This is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And boy, oh boy, I have a story behind at least 22 books because I am so happy to welcome Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child here to talk about Douglas. Douglas and Lincoln have written this wonderful series called Agent Pendergast, and this is book 22. I cannot believe it. It's like yesterday that I read the first one, which is called Relic, and I am so happy to welcome you to Joy on Paper Live. Oh boy, guys, this is fantastic. So
Thank you very
Thank
I'm
you, Patsy.
I'm happy to have you here. So I don't know where to start because I think I'll start right at the beginning. In life, you have these moments when you see somebody or something just happens and you see a person in a certain place and you just fall in love with that person. And so I'm wondering if when you first saw each other in the Russian tea room, was it love at first sight?
I'll answer that one because I was invited by Lincoln to have lunch at the Russian tea room to discuss a book. Now, I didn't know who Lincoln was, but he called me cold. And at the time, I was working at the Museum of Natural History in New York, and he identified himself as a senior editor at St. Martin's Press. And he wondered if I'd be willing to have lunch with him at the Russian tea room to discuss a book. And of course, I was very willing to do that. And so I had to rush out to the Salvation Army and get a jacket so I could get into the Russian tea room. But when I arrived, I was looking around for the distinguished gray haired editor I'd imagined had called me. And all I could see was this kid seated at the worst table in the house, waving
Thanks.
his hand at me. I thought, that can't be Lincoln Child, a senior editor, but it was.
It
And that was
was
the first glimpse I had of my writing partner of the last, 20, 35 years.
35
And if
years.
you look very closely there, you can see a plaque dedicated to our meeting right there by the revolving door underneath the canopy of the Russian tea room.
It was one of my favorite places when I used to do a lot of work in New York in the old days. A fantastic restaurant. But as you said, you needed a coat to get into that one. And it was a wonderful location. Now, I don't remember what Lincoln, where were you the senior editor?
At St. Martin's Press.
Oh, that's impressive. That's something. So
Thank you.
there you are. That's pretty. And you're younger than he is. So you're a bold guy. And of course, we mentioned that, of course, Douglas, you were working at the museum. And so let's start with that. After you met, and you remember that lunch, who paid for that lunch?
Oh, I did. The editor always pays,
The
no
editor.
matter no matter who's he's taking out. Sorry, I'm having a tough time staying in this little mugshot area here.
Yeah, I have to divide you guys up a little bit here.
I was a huge fan of the museum, and I took all their behind the scenes tours as a member, and some of my friends were docents. And finding somebody to write a book about the museum, particularly the history and the behind the scenes antics, was a no brainer for me as an editor. And to my mind, anyway, it came with the added advantage of getting a free tour of the real stuff, not just the things that the members see, but those things behind the locked doors and the tarps that they don't let you look at. And Doug was unwilling to, in a polite way, he deflected my needling to give me a real tour. And finally, he succumbed and agreed. But of course, it had to be late at night so that he wouldn't be asked a lot of questions. And he had a key to the museum. The security was a lot less tight in my God, the late 80s than it is now. And so he took me all over the place. He let me in at midnight and saw the dinosaur bone storage room, which is so heavy that it has to be in the basement because the weight of the bones would collapse the floor otherwise. He took me to the whale eyeball room where all the whales are pickled in vinegar, and we had canapes while we were in there. And finally, we ended up in the fourth floor, where at the time it was called the Hall of Cretaceous Dinosaurs. And by this time, there was a thunderstorm outside, which you could see through the skylights, and you couldn't ask for a better setting. And so I turned to Doug and said, Doug, I know that you've been thinking about writing a novel, a mystery novel set in this museum, but I think what we really ought to do is write a thriller together because you know everything about this place, and I know how not to write a thriller, and to some degree how to write a thriller because of all the bad and good books I've either declined or edited. And together, I think we could do a great job. And it took a long time, but as they say, the rest is history.
Okay, what did you think about this, Doug? Did you think, yeah, sure, why not? I can write this book.
No,
Well,
I didn't
I,
think that.
I don't mean to interrupt, but by the time we really had this conversation, Doug's book that I edited, Dinosaurs in the Attic, was either out or about to come out, and he was already interested in various nonfiction titles. It was a bit of a push to get him to agree to do both kinds of books, especially since he understood, as anybody would, how the hell are two people going to write a novel together? It's a strange idea.
Absolutely. But you did it. And that book came out, right? That book came out, I think, 1995? Yeah,
Yes.
1995. It's your first book published together. Were people still getting checks in those days, or was it already electronic transfer?
No, everything was done by check, and all the editing was done on paper. There was no electronic, uh, at least at that time, there was very little electronic editing involved or payment.
Well,
They
Link,
would
you
drop
must have
our green stamps off at the front door and drive away.
Link, you must have felt happy. You were responsible for making sure that many authors had gotten checks. So finally, when you get one, it must have felt pretty good.
It was a double-edged sword. It did feel good because I had certainly signed check requisitions for a whole lot more money than I ever got as a salary as an editor. And we didn't get that much dough for Relic, but it was certainly welcome. But on the other hand, I had I'd always had free reign when it came to editing. And so it was a rather unpleasant shock when Relic, which we were told by our editor was far too long, came back to us line edited in some awful colored pen. And what I had done to other people in lesser degrees was here done to us at great and savage length.
Doug, explain how did you? It must have been easier to get an agent since you Link already had all these connections, right?
Frankly, I considered myself to be a very important budding nonfiction author. And I didn't really think that writing a novel about a brain eating monster in a museum was going to enhance my career. So I said, we're not going to use my agent at all. I'm not even going to tell him about this book. And so you go out and find a new agent for us. But whatever you do not tell this agent not to show our manuscript to my editor at Simon and Schuster, because at that point I was now writing a nonfiction book for Simon and Schuster for the great editor Michael Korda. And so Link went out and he found us an agent, and he told this agent not to show the book to Michael Korda at Simon and Schuster. And the first thing the agent did was show the book to Michael Korda at Simon and Schuster. And I got a call from Korda, and he said, Doug, I've got a funny coincidence to report. There's another author out there named Douglas Preston who's I'm holding a manuscript by him in my hands. It's about a brain eating monster in a museum. Isn't that a funny coincidence? And of course, I was silent because I wasn't sure what to say. And Corda said, "It is a coincidence, isn't it?" And I said, "No, Michael, let me explain. Let me explain. He said, no, no explanation necessary. I just want you to listen to something. So I was listening on the phone and I heard this enormous whump sound. It sounded like someone had fallen down, like a whump. And I said, what was that? What was that? Are you all right? And Michael said, that was your manuscript entering the wastebasket.
Oh.
Now, he said, get back to work on the real book you're writing, which was a book called Talking to the Ground, and forget this brain eating monster stuff. So I was so mad, I called up Lincoln. I said, this is outrageous. This agent of yours just about ruined my literary career showing that manuscript to my editor at Simon & Schuster. So take my name off it. And I want nothing more to do with this project. You just finished it yourself. And Lincoln said, you sure? You mean I can keep whatever money? I said, you can keep all the money. Just keep me out of it. I don't know, a couple of months went by, and then Lincoln called me up and said, Doug, we got an offer on the book.
I
Are
didn't
you
say
sure?
we. I didn't say
He said,
we.
I got an offer on the book. Are you sure you don't want any of the money? And I said, I'm sure I don't want any of that money, but how much was it? And he told me, and I said, oh my God, I want half that money. And Link said, yes, but there's a requirement that you put your name back on the book. So I actually called up my agent. Are we allowed to use bad words on this podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I called up my actual agent and I explained to him the situation, and he thought it was really funny. And I said, look, should I put my name on this book? And he said, Doug, put your name on the book. Don't be chicken shit. Go ahead and do it. And maybe this book will sell, because I hate to tell you, but these other books you're writing are not selling at all.
Michael Korda, for people who don't know, Michael Korda was the ultimate. He was, if you could get to Michael Korda in New York City, you knew you were somewhere, right?
That's right. But I was nowhere with that manuscript with him. But I will say this. After Relic was made into a #1 box office hit movie and was a bestseller, Michael Korda said to me, Doug, I rarely make mistakes in my editing career. I've rarely made mistakes, but I think I might have made a mistake throwing your manuscript into the wastebasket a little too hastily there.
It is so funny. And Link, tell us about the premise of this book, because it is strange, it is unusual, and then we'll talk about what they did in the movie, because they made some major changes in there, including dropping Pendergast.
The premise of Relic, not the new one,
Yeah,
Angel
the
of
Relic.
End.
Let's stick with Relic for a little while, then we'll get to the new one.
Okay. Of course, it had to be set in the museum. That was the and Doug and I spent several days at my house in Westchester, sitting on the porch, brainstorming, drinking scotch, drinking and we had the idea for a book, and I have no idea where that. Give credit where credit is due. I think Bob Gleason, our editor, has something to do with the idea of a crate coming back from South America, and it gets cracked, and something awful inside turns people into something. Exactly how much of that is his? I remember him writing, "The crock gets cracked, and all hell breaks loose." Doug and I don't write science fiction per se, and we don't write supernatural either. We tried to hew a lot closer to Michael Crichton, especially then. And so we had to try and figure out how we could make this brain-eating monster that by eating these plants transforms from a human to this thing and make it scientifically plausible. And I'm not saying we succeeded at that, but what we did was, thanks in large part to Doug's scientific background and the incredibly flavorful and colorful milieu of the museum, which we gave a fake name to. It is, in many ways, the American Museum, although we've added many fictitious touches. But because of those strengths, um, we were able to have the reader suspend their disbelief, so that when we got to the part where the brain-eating plants comes in and they're fighting the monster with the FBI and everybody else coming in, It didn't matter anymore how we got there. It was just people had to turn the pages.
Oh, you definitely have to turn the pages there. And now, Doug, it, so here you are, you're a scientist and working on very serious books, and you write this book, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot of horror in it, a lot of layers to it, including I don't know how many people died, but there were definitely two boys who died, right?
Yes.
What did you decide to do that? It was like a prince in the tower kind of thing. I feel like that we
Well,
lost the princes in the tower in England, and then so it's added to this horror of this story.
the peculiar thing is the way we worked in the beginning was Link had been my editor for Dinosaurs in the Attic. And so I pretty much wrote the first drafts of this book after we plotted it together. And then he rewrote what I wrote and destroyed my Shakespearean level prose. But that's another discussion. But anyway, I found myself really enjoying writing this book. It was so much fun. It was just dreaming up these scenes and creating characters. And I have to be honest with you, maybe I shouldn't say this, but there were quite a few people in the museum that I'd worked with that really irritated me. And so I had the opportunity to have them murdered and their brains eaten by a monster.
Oh, that's
And
fun.
that was really fun. And including the director of the museum, who, by the way, after the book was published, stopped me in the halls of the museum. This was after I'd left my job. And he said, Doug, I'm so sorry you still don't work here at the museum so I could fire your ass for writing that horrible novel. What were you thinking?
Oh,
Anyway,
well,
but so I enjoyed it very much, and I think Link enjoyed it as well. We just had a lot of fun writing that book, and I gave it. I gave them. I was a little worried about my literary reputation. I gave it to my wife to read. She was one of the first readers, and she read it. And she'd read all my previous serious books, and she said, "Doug, I hate to tell. I don't know if you're going to be offended by this or not, but this is one hell of a read. I couldn't stop reading. This is the best book you've ever. I just could not put this book down. Oh my God, this is one of the best." I was really offended. I was so upset. But
Tell her the rest of what she said. And she said, "This is one of the best books you've ever written. From now on, let Lincoln do all the writing, and you can just put your name on it." No, she did not say that.
no. But now, so you got Doug back by, let's say, the idea of money, and this is quite a big deal. So this is 1995, and 2 years later, you have a film. This is really fast work.
Yes, we've been waiting for such fast work to happen again ever since. And so far, lightning hasn't struck twice.
And now I hope that like you're selling I don't know how many millions and millions of books, but that you're very much like Lee Child, who, by the way, also in his first book, Killing Floor, killed a lot of his bosses, who can be the producer for his series of Jack Reacher, and he has control of it. As in Hollywood, and what happened to you, first of all, when they, and having worked in Hollywood and adapted a few books for Hollywood, they always drop things. They always change things. I think that they changed Ian Cuthbert to a woman, and they dropped Pendergast, who everybody liked, and then they made D'Agosta. I think he was supposed to be fat and middle aged, and they turned him into a handsome guy, right? So they made lots of changes.
yeah, the one change that we never quite understood was dropping of Pendergast. I think the way they explained it to us was that he was too complex and unusual a character for the movies. One producer said was, look, everyone knows who D'Agosta is. He's a cop, rough on the outside, ethnic guy, heart of gold on the inside, that kind of thing. Everyone's seen that character in the movies, but nobody has seen anyone like Pendergast. And we don't know what to do with him. So we just took him out.
Ugh. Yeah.
And you would think that would be an opportunity, but that's not the way they look at it.
Oh, no.
If we can clone something, let's do it.
They
But
they
it's
bought the book
it's
and
worth
yeah, what?
I was just going to say it's worth mentioning that, and maybe this is the first time we've mentioned it, on air here, but Paramount is now making a television series based on our book Cabinet of Curiosities, which features Pendergast. And this time he is not going to be left on the cutting room floor.
Oh, good, good. Because he's Pendergast, really. Duh. Everybody loves it. So,
They
Our readers
do. I mean,
certainly do.
22 books
yeah,
of
22 books. 22 books. It's amazing. And here we are back now to the new one. And it's called Angel of Vengeance. Now, Angel of Vengeance, first, I like the cover. And this is so intriguing how you've managed. And this is, the book is partly horror. There's a little, I don't know how you want to describe it. And it's also a time travel book. So tell us how you got into this, because this is very much relating to three of your other books, right? So it's a sort of not an offshoot, but it's part of the story going forward from some of the other books. So explain how we got to this point where we are now in a different timeline, a dual
It
timeline.
it began with, I'm trying not to give anything away here, but it didn't, we didn't intend for this to happen. We didn't intend to write two books with cliffhangers. The first book was came out of an idea Doug had for solving the D.B. Cooper mystery effectively with our own characters in place, but very similar to that. And the solution to that was very unusual, to say the least. And it ended up involving not time travel. We don't want to get into those kind of paradoxes, but parallel universes in the sense that I can go to a parallel universe and hurt my grandfather, and it won't. I'll still be here in this universe. So the grandfather paradox is not affected. But what happened is found her chance in this series of books, each one, by the way, which is a standalone story where the problem in the beginning is solved at the end, with full of action, but there's always a twist at the very end. And the twist is that Constance Green, the ward of Pendergast, who has a long and complicated backstory with Pendergast and Dr. Lang, the anti hero of this book. She finds a way, she thinks, to get revenge on Lang. And that is what spawned the trilogy, because Pendergast and ultimately his brother Diogenes had to get involved in this to make sure that it didn't end up even more horribly than it might. And so that's what we did in this book. And it, again, we didn't intend for it to be like this, but the nice thing is each of the three books, Bloodless, Cabinet of Dr. Lang, and Angel of Vengeance, are all standalone thrillers that we believe are all great stories on their own, but they also form a trilogy at the end of which there are no more loose ends, no more family impedimenta of Pendergast to complicate future stories beyond what would normally happen. So we wrapped it all up, and it took a lot of work, but we're proud of the result.
You should be. You should be. It's great. And Doug, now who's responsible for keeping it all organized? Because it's complex. You have so many levels. You have so many characters over the years. It's still hard to believe how many years you've been together. And but each of you, who, for example, Constance Green, whose idea was Constance Green? Because that really she's an important character.
That's very interesting. After we published the hardcover of the Cabinet of Curiosities, we had one of our readers email us and say, what if one of Dr. Lang's experimental subjects survived and lived a long time because of the elixir that he created? And so in the paperback of Cabinet of Curiosities, we made a very small change. We had at one point a little pair of eyes looking out from behind a wall, and that was it. And we thought, who's going to notice this? No one's going to notice this little change. We must have gotten 2,000 emails saying, whose eyes are those? What were those eyes doing? And so forth. And that was the introduction of Constance Green. Now, the actual appearance of Constance and her personality, her appearance was really Lincoln's doing. Lincoln said, "This is what she looks like," and described her very minutely. And as an aside, told me that he really had the hots for her. Sorry, Link. But as far as her personality was a joint project. She's a little bit crazy, maybe more than a little bit crazy, and her craziness breaks out especially in the area of justice and vengeance. And so this whole trilogy, Bloodless, The Cabinet of Dr. Lang, and Angel of Vengeance, is a vengeance story about Constance, this absolutely implacable foe. You do not want to be her enemy, taking the most horrifying revenge on Dr. Lang, who, in her own timeline, murdered her sister. But in this new timeline, maybe isn't going to be able to murder her sister because Constance arrives before her sister's murdered. Of course, that's one of the things we don't want to tell you because this is
don't give
we
it
don't
away.
want any spoilers.
No spoilers.
I just want to add one thing to that, which is as Constance developed, and it took many books for that to happen, as Doug said, I began to get the hots for her purely platonically, you understand.
Yeah.
And I saw that there were many roles she could play as Pendergast Ward and maybe something else. And she became more and more of an important character as well as a frightening character and partly insane, as Doug said. And I really wanted to see her not in every book, but to play front and center roles in some of the books. And in fact, she over the last 3 or 4 books, she's been almost as large a character as Pendergast, and I'm really happy about that. And both Doug and I struggled really hard on these books. And I feel particularly proud of this one because of how we've brought it all together. And now that it's come to a conclusion, Constance can go back to being his sidekick as opposed to his fellow protagonist and just play a much smaller role in most stories.
Well,
I'm glad that this happened.
you know,
Very
we mentioned Dr. Lang. What a character. What a character. Who was first responsible for him? Who got that idea? Who's crazy?
Well, that I don't think we can actually answer that question. Dr. Lang was really a creation of both of us. Link, do you have any insight into who first thought of him? That's missed the
I think
time.
it was. I think it was you. I know the name was mine because I took it from Lovecraft's Plateau of Lang. But I think the idea of him having a prolonged life elixir was yours. I'm not sure, but I know for a fact that it was your idea that he be found, his body be found in Cabinet of Curiosities, and having only recently died, which was a big surprise. Giving away here, but that book that's 15 books ago, and so it was really a. And Doug had this idea about Elixir, and then I had an idea of an intellectual way Pendergast could go back in time and try and figure out the mystery. And so that book, Cabinet of Curiosities, we were at the time we'd written The Ice Limit and Thunderhead and Reliquary, and we were, I wouldn't say treading water, but we weren't rocketing upward as fast as we wanted to. And after that book came out, and I was talking to a lot of booksellers on the tour, they all said, "You guys really hit it out of the park this time." And in some ways, I think Cabinet of Curiosities was a turning point for us. It certainly gave us enough meat. We're still gnawing on the bone today. In fact, that the book coming out tomorrow is probably the final couple of bites we were able to take off of that bone. And that's why Paramount is using that book as the basis for their movie or their series because it is such a strong book with so many threads.
It is. And the thing is, Dr. Lang, let's talk a little bit about this idea of this elixir. And it's curious, lately I've gotten a couple of books, by the way, about people working in Silicon Valley who are doing everything they can to figure out how to live longer. They didn't like that Stephen Jobs died so young, and they are putting a lot of money, research money, heavy duty, big money, into trying to figure out an elixir that will keep them alive for, I don't know, want to live forever. Idea is there, and then with you, this explain this kata, what is kata equina?
Yeah, that's the elixir is, or the arcanum as it's sometimes called, is not doesn't prolong life indefinitely, but it does extend life significantly. And but for Dr. Lang, the point of extending his life is not just to extend his life. I think these Silicon Valley people just want to live longer. He has a specific project that he is working on, which I will not tell you what it is because that's a spoiler. But that project is so complex and so difficult to achieve that it's going to require several lifetimes of him working on it in order to achieve it. So this elixir that he's developed isn't an end in and of itself, but it is a means by which he is prolonging his life in order to accomplish this other really bizarre and shocking goal. And so the basis for why he developed it.
We won't give anything away, but as I said, what I think the guys in Silicon Valley, they want to live long enough maybe for AI to take over the world, and I don't know why they want to what they're doing. But so when you got the idea, Link, then how did you run with it? Were you excited with the idea
Which idea is that
of
in
Dr.
particular?
Lang and what his goal is?
Initially, it was simply a way for us to create a really interesting setup for a book, which was 100 years ago plus, somebody in New York was killing young women to extract a certain the cauda equina to try and live longer. And of course, he was like a Jack the Ripper character, insane and not heard of for a long time. And then in modern day Manhattan, the same murders are beginning to be done again. And so the question becomes, is this a copycat murderer, or did Lang succeed? And he's still out there um, harvesting the resources he needs for his elixir. And so that was the setup we had. And Lang was just, at that time, he was just a person from the 19th century. But over the course of the book, yes, we did get excited about it. We decided he should be Pendergast's ancestor. We decided that he should recreate the Pendergast family house in New York City. We decided Pendergast should inherit that house. And with that, he inherited a whole lot of other baggage: poisoning great aunts and mountebanks and all. We didn't anticipate all that, but we really felt that story had more than its share of shocks and twists and turns. And then our secondary hero at the time, poor Bill Smithback, was about to be operated on by Lang with no anesthetic. But that was stopped in
Yeah,
time.
you do some awful things to people.
Well,
So it all of this is so much fun. We can see, I think, through the books that you have horrific things, but also like surgery without anesthetic. But you're funny. You have a lot of humor in there, and of course, with this world building, you have a lot of research that you've done. I think both of you. I don't know which of you is the biggest researcher, but isn't it fun to do research, especially now you're going back in time? So there are lots of things to investigate.
Yeah, we actually divide up the research according to our interests. And I have to say that Lincoln was the one who did most of the research on 19th century Manhattan. He's really good at that. He also has the ability to write English prose in the 19th century style, which is phenomenal that he can do that. He's really good at that. I think that might have to do with his being an English major in college and studying the 19th century novel. But so he's good at that. I have my research areas that I'm interested in. And so we both enjoy research. We pretty much divided up 50-50 along the lines of our interests.
So Lincoln, when you're doing research, do you love that moment where you are looking up some one thing and then suddenly one little sentence might send you just going down this rabbit hole, and finding all sorts of interesting stuff?
That happens sometimes, yes, it definitely does. I've edited enough historical novels where the writer said, I did 2 years of research and goddamn it, you're going to learn all about it and suffer with me. And so I try and make sure that we put in just enough of what we've learned to fire people's interest rather than slake it. But I did a lot of research on the street gangs because I think both Doug and I have found the 5 points to be a fascinating area, even before that film came out. And the gangs that really existed that led me to imagine some a gang of women who filed their teeth to points and this and that and the other thing. But often I will also find just bits of stray information that I know we can use down the road, and I will file that away for a future book. Not necessarily the topic of the book, but something that will help deepen the book, add to the warp and the weft of the book, or just a tidbit that will fascinate people,
Well,
hopefully the way it does
it
me.
is those tidbits that give a novel levels. You have it enriches. Even it can be just a passing mention of a food, or a passing mention of a smell. All of these, that's why your novels are so great. That's why people keep, when they finish one, and I've know so many people who have read these, and they'll say, I read it in a day. And I say, you have to learn to be like me. You have to stretch it out, at least take 2 days, because it's I've done it. I can't remember which one. I read it. I started in the afternoon after my radio program. I remember I started it, and I was done before bedtime. And I thought, why did I do that? I needed to stretch it out, read just one quarter at a time, have fun for 4 days, and you go back and reread it. Now, which one of you is the biggest wordy? That the person who finds the interesting words. Do you both love words? Of course, as an editor, you've seen a lot of manuscripts, but which one of you loves words?
We both love words.
Yeah, I have a father in law who's 94 who reads my books, and he makes a list of all the words he doesn't know. Now, he was a professor, so he knows a lot of words, right? But he makes a list of all the words he doesn't know, usually on the back of a napkin in our books. And then he calls me up and he wants to talk about these words. And so I, long ago, started to put into the novels Jim words, because his name is Jim, my father in law, big words. And Link does the same thing. And we have a lot of fun with putting unusual and sometimes archaic words into our books. Now, I know sometimes our readers get annoyed. And why do you use the big words? Nowadays, you can click on a word and get a definition in 2 seconds. You don't have to go over to the dictionary. So we just have fun. We both love the English language and treasure it.
Well,
And
you
we
put
feel we're like guardians of the language. If we don't keep those words alive, who will? And very rarely I come upon a word that Doug doesn't know, and vice versa happens. And so we learn from each other. And I feel absolutely no guilt in putting in terms like pons asinorum or something like that, because if people are interested, they'll look it up and they'll learn something.
yeah,
If they don't want to look it up, they'll just bleep right over it and they'll be none the wiser and none the worse off for it.
exactly. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, because I feel the same way. Put the word there. You never know when somebody will look up a word, and then that can even lead to more. This intellectual curiosity. Sometimes it takes one word to, I didn't know that word. And then you look at that, and then you look at the thesaurus, and It's all sorts of mental exercise, and that people get that with your books. If they
And it still happens. I'm just trying to find right now a word I didn't know that I had to look up. I'm not sure if I'll find it in time, but
words in this book, and it's a great read. I know that people are going to enjoy it so much. And you mentioned that now they're making a film out of what? Which one? How? A
Cabinet
bunch.
of Curiosities.
curiosities.
So the start is that's going to be streaming. It's a stream.
Yes, that'll be a Paramount Plus television series. Hopefully, not just Cabinet, but they want to move on from Cabinet to other books in the series. Hopefully, if people enjoy it, it will be an ongoing series.
I'm sure they will, and it's wonderful because you didn't have much in. I don't know if you'll have any input into this. Maybe they'll listen to you a little bit more because now you are so famous, so very famous, and there is a lot of criticism out there if they don't at least keep the main idea of your characters because people know them so well. It's often happens nowadays when people know characters, they don't want you to change them. They want those characters. I can envision these characters. And so we'll see how they do it because I think I remember being disappointed in the movie, the Relic movie, because they didn't stick enough to. I kept saying, why isn't this? Why did he become a girl? That kind of thing. Although, what's her name? What's the actress who played it? Linda Hunt. Linda Hunt, I
Yeah.
think. She was very good, but they change things and sometimes it drives you crazy.
Yes, we've
Okay,
been warned.
go
We've
ahead,
been
Doug.
warned. We've been warned by our readers, in no uncertain terms, that if a movie or a television series is made, if they change Pendergast at all, that there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah, I hope so because I don't know if you know the story of what happened to Larry Block, the mystery writer of America, Grandmaster Lawrence Block. They bought his one of his series, Bernie Rodenbach, he's a gentleman thief, New York gentleman, very New York guy, the cat burglar, and a really wonderful character for a series. When Hollywood bought it, who played Bernie? Who do you think played Bernie? I don't know if you saw the movie. Probably not, because not anybody saw the movie.
What's his name? Aiello. Danny Aiello.
No. Guess again. Anyone. Anyone. Just guess anyone who you think would be a New
Joe,
York
Joe Pesci.
gentleman. No, Whoopi
I'm
Goldberg.
thinking of the least likely people.
Whoopi Goldberg. Oh, yeah, that's why you didn't see the movie. Because there were a lot of this is one of Lawrence Block's best series, and everybody knew Bernie was a cat burglar, a very New York guy, and somehow it didn't translate to Whoopi Goldberg playing him. So hopefully, Paramount will be a little more careful with your characters because, as I said, people know them. 22 books. And now, of course, the money, you don't get checks anymore. All you get is a cha-ching, cha-ching.
Not that many cha-chings. I think you have to cut that back a bit.
I think this book is. I know people were waiting for it, and then of course it will help when you get the Paramount series. Then they'll sell even more books and more, and then you'll have to write more and more. So have you already started 23, or have you finished 23?
We're about 13 chapters into it.
Okay, I knew it, and it's wonderful. Can you imagine all those years ago sitting in I don't know if you remember what you had for lunch that day or if you saved the receipt. Wow.
Doug and I know what we had for lunch that day. Even if we didn't actually have it, we know what we had. Right,
Yeah,
Doug?
We'll just make it up. We're fiction writers.
that's it. That's it.
So, no,
We
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 must
had
have.
we had
We did.
Blinio caviar.
We
Uh,
did. We had Blenio caviar. Absolutely. How can you go to the Russian tea room and not eat caviar, especially on someone else's dime?
that's it. St. Martin's paid for it, and I think they must have. I don't know how long you stayed with them. You're not still with them, are you?
No, I was there. Oh, me as an editor?
Yeah.
No, I left before we began writing Relic.
So
I
uh,
was there 7 years, 7 or 8 years.
you are both fantastic, and I think it's just wonderful what you've done with this book. As we said, it's a standalone, and people can start with this one, but when they do, they will want to go back and oh, why are you here? I've got two of you, Doug. And I had,
Oh,
Hi.
That's a Freudian slip if I ever saw one.
oh,
No,
I
this
don't,
is much more.
oh,
This is much more to my liking. You don't have to
I,
change
now
anything.
listen, this is very strange. I don't know how that happened, but I'm wondering if Doug has been up to something here that he would do
I'm
this.
hacking into your system.
Yes, because I know you love to see yourself, and for
Somebody has to be.
that's oh, you guys, it's amazing. You've grown up together now, right?
We're like brothers, really. We're more than just writing partners. We really have had this wonderful partnership for 35 years just based on a handshake. And we've lasted even longer than the Beatles, Lincoln likes to point out.
Uh, Do I? Oh dear.
That is
Up with
true.
me.
That the story about doing it with a handshake in this business, it, it can be fraught with problems, but it looks like it's worked out for you guys.
So far, so good. We're not looking back.
Okay, this is your website, so people can go there. It's Preston Child because now you can't. It's hard to think of you separately, although you both have great books, and I'm going to have each of you on for your other books. Okay, so we can have conversations because you both have wonderful books that I've read and I love. And but I want to thank you so much for joining me on Joy on Paper Live. It's a real treat for me. Just it's amazing. As I said, I've been reading you long before I had the radio program, which I started in 2015. So you were already out, and I don't remember what book you were up to at that point, but I was probably up to it because in those days, I used to buy books every time a new book came out. I used to buy it. That's why I had over 6,000 books, and my husband was so happy when I started the radio program and I started getting free books. He said, "Finally, you're getting free books." So anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me. And Douglas Preston, Lincoln Child, you are amazing authors. And I'm so happy that you had a
You,
wonderful lunch.
you're an amazing host. Thank you for having us.
Oh,
Yes, thank you. We enjoyed it very much. Good
okay.
question.
Thank you. Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye.
They are wonderful writers. You can see this is life. You never know. And if Lincoln had not reached out to Doug, think of that. All of these books would never have been written. You never know. You have to try. You have to give life a chance and do bold things. And who knows? You might write 22 books or 30 books or 40 books, and you'll have a much happier life, even if you only write one book, because writing makes you happy. You don't have to write to be a bestseller. Just the idea, when I say it's joy on paper, it really is joy on paper to see your words. So you might not write a bestseller, but it's a book that your children will enjoy, your grandchildren, your relatives 100 years from now. So anyway, so help me bring more authors to you. You never know who is going to inspire you. And I hope that the story of these two guys getting together has inspired you. Please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live. Just push that subscribe button. And remember, all of the authors who I've interviewed would really appreciate a comment from you. They love comments, and it touches their heart when somebody says something nice to them because they need it too. They live so often in their heads all the time. So when they come out and they peek at what people write about them, they get very happy. So please subscribe and comment. Bye bye now.